Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Storied author Lionel Shriver. Lionel has been writing for many decades, and in this conversation, which is ostensibly to promote Janus-faced upcoming Bigger Picture conference in Albuquerque at the end of September, buy tickets via the link below. In this conversation, we talk about her stance on the gender question or the gender ideology issue, and we branch off from there to her thoughts on the fate of Europe, which is currently being swallowed whole by mass migration. She's got some very strong opinions on that. We also get into her boomerness and the choices that her generation made that are of questionable impact to the current and upcoming generations. Lionel is a fascinating woman, a very deep thinker, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with her. The conversation just keeps on going and going and going because we find more to conversate about. You can find links to her work down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Lionel Shriver. Where are we beginning?
I can easily go back to childhood. I was raised as a standard liberal Democrat. My family was against the war and recycled.
Okay.
Both my parents, however, were religious of a certain stripe. That means they were not fundamentalists. They kept a jar in the middle of the table to contribute to world hunger relief.
Okay.
That sort. But I did end up parting ways with them on religion. I didn't get religion. I don't think I ever have. And this did create a rift. It didn't completely destroy our relationship, but it gave me a taste for rejecting orthodoxy. And a little later in my life, I started rejecting the orthodoxy of the liberal Democrat. I don't think I fully matured into someone who no longer embraced that identity until I was in my early 30s. I think that's the first time I had the experience of forming my own opinions independently of influences of family or party. And that's because I moved to Belfast, Northern Ireland, and I was in a state of almost perfect ignorance. I didn't understand the conflict at all. And so I set about to educate myself, both reading things and meeting people, and came
What,
to
what decade? What decade is this? Just so we know the historical context.
Good. It was 1987 when I moved there, and I stayed there until 1999. So it was 12 years of a PhD in conflict studies. And not to put too fine a point on it, I came to detest the IRA. Now, the Loyalists were also pretty detestable, but tended to be pathetic. And it was really the Republicans who seemed to most deserve my distaste. And I came to the view as well that the conflict was overblown, that especially once a lot of the discrimination was that kicked it off was overcompensated for, that ultimately it was kind of petty. And in fact, I believe that the Northern Irish basically invented identity politics. It had all the same stuff, the same factionalism, the same pernickettiness about language, the same self-pity, the same fetishization of victimhood. I know this is why I reacted so strongly when it came along in its full-fledged glory in the West, circa 2012 to 2014, because I already hated this stuff. So, um, and 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 it triggered me, if you will. So, um, and I had an immediate sense of what's this? What the hell? In relation to the what I identify as 2012's sudden obsession with transgenderism. I think that's the year that all these documentaries started coming out on television about little boys in dresses. And I was disconcerted why suddenly we cared so much about this very small population of people. And I didn't understand why suddenly we were not supposed to regard this as a mental illness, as a point of serious mental confusion. You're born a certain sex and you think you weren't. That is in defiance of the most primitive reality. But what strikes me about that experience of instant suspicion and keeping an eye on it is that this is one issue that came with a warning label. And I am still not certain how it was successfully communicated to not just me, but pretty much everybody, that if you had a discouraging word to say about this new phenomenon, this new social mania, you'd better keep your mouth shut, or your professional life is going to be over. Even your social life is going to be over. Now, how that message was communicated, I really still do not understand. But I am not proud of the fact that I didn't really stick my neck out on this issue until 2016. So I had been sitting there getting increasingly disgusted. And I didn't at that time have a regular column, but I did enough comment pieces that I would have had opportunity to say something, and I didn't. Now, I think that was intelligently self-protective, because that perception that you couldn't say anything was accurate. And even in 2016, I was taking my career in my hands to say anything. And that was much earlier than a lot of the other people who have since mobilized into a real constituency of which Janus-faced is representative. It was earlier than a lot of these people came on the scene. I'm thinking we'd all agree that the Overton window has finally opened up a crack, and it's possible to criticize this phenomenon. But I think it's always worth remembering how long people with grave reservations, which are obviously from this perspective, our perspective, overwhelmingly warranted. How was it that so long passed that nobody said anything? And that means, one of my most recent books is titled Mania, because I'm very interested in this whole phenomenon of social mania, which almost by definition means something that you cannot refute publicly or without grave consequences. And it just means to me, because this phenomenon is so destructive, so zany, so potentially damaging to children. How did this happen? And how did suddenly everyone believe this where they didn't before 5 minutes before? But I find it petrifying.
The consequences for speaking about this are more or less constrained to a certain class, the lettered class and the elite class. Working class bros and women and lower class people doesn't really affect in a negative way on a professional level. It's academia and the media and political level. So there's a class element to it. And second point that I'd like to hear you riff on in whatever way you so desire. You asked why this thing happened so fast and everybody was on board uniformly, almost, at least the power structures were. The expectations within the lettered class, elite classes. It seems to me, and this is not a novel observation, that the West had been conditioned since the end of World War II to be on a steady march of liberation, liberatory politics, civil rights. Once gay marriage was overcome, it's just natural that this whole narrative needs another cause.
Of course. I made that observation myself.
Yeah.
I believe that the trans thing, and it can't possibly be controversial, was a direct result of the broad acceptance of gay marriage, which it meant the whole gay liberation thing was finished. That is, it had achieved its object. There was really nothing more to do. And for the most part, you were dealing with Western-wide acceptance that some people are gay and that's fine and who cares? And that's, ostensibly what what that movement wanted. And the worst thing to happen to any activism is to get what it wants, right? Because it no longer serves a purpose.
But the tactics that were successful for gay marriage were replicated and then turned up. I can think of a couple. For example, homophobia became transphobia. And the gay liberation, as you put it, the gay liberation movement had begun in the media. Stories making the homosexuals more relatable and less scary, just normalizing that class of people.
They showed up in television shows all the time.
Yeah.
There was a long period, especially in the 90s, you couldn't find a show that didn't have a gay character, at least one. It was an obligation.
Yeah, it was an obligation.
Comical.
Yeah. But that shows some level of media manipulation or propagandist arm of achieving liberation. And that's all then retrofitted for the trans phenomena or the trans ideology.
Yes,
so,
and then also this whole larger movement has been a celebration of, a nice word is difference, a perhaps more accurate word is deviance. That is, it's about abolishing the whole concept of having a norm. When in fact, completely flipping stigma on its head and stigmatizing normality. And, that starts to flirt with the end game on civilization.
Really?
Well, we have a whole month. I've written about this. We have a whole month now that we basically celebrate every sexual practice aside from the kind that makes children. That is that's implicitly biologically self-destructive.
So how do you parse that? If this is a progress, how do you defend against the insinuation of the slippery slope that gay marriage leads to? Surrogacy is one way, like gay adoption, gay surrogacy, and I don't know your thoughts on that. But also the trans phenomena.
I am not opposed to it, but it's not very efficient. I mean, one of my biggest problems with the whole trans thing is its inefficiency. It's waste. We have plenty of women and men already without playing swapsies. So it's a waste of resources.
Yeah. How does that track as a argument, though? This is.
I'm surprised not to run across it more often. In fact, I've never run across it aside from in my own columns. But I think it's an important point. It's certainly a waste of medical resources, and we're we're talking now, we're using our time. That's the biggest resource that we've got. And we're using it up on talking about trans. And ultimately, that's a waste of resources too. This is a waste of social and political capital. It is a transparently destructive and ridiculous direction to put social and economic energies. It doesn't help anyone really. I mean, even on that suicide rate, you don't reduce the suicide rate of people who are not happy with their sex. And I also think it's psychically wrong-headed in that a lot of this is about displacement. Most people are unhappy one way or another. I mean, we have such trouble pinning down what we mean by being happy that there's hardly anyone out there who meets an ever receding or an ever elusive state, a kind of mythical, fullness and wholeness. Well, basically most people just don't feel that way all the time and think they're being cheated as a consequence. And there's something else there's something they need to do to get to that state. And this idea that, oh, you were born in the wrong sex, and that's, if only you could switch sexes, then you would be happy. It's the same grass is greener mentality that people apply to just about everything. If only I had a bigger house. It's not any different. It's naturally envious. It's grasping after something, usually trying to solve an interior problem with an exterior solution, which never works. I think it's been this fad, which is what it is, has sponsored many tiny personal tragedies. And it's imploded many a family. And the movement itself would have you believe that there are all these people running around that have discovered their authentic selves and now are living much happier lives. I remain skeptical on that point, and I certainly refuse to allow them to use the word authentic because it's the very opposite of authentic. It is a theater of pretending to be something that you are not. That is the opposite of authentic.
Achieve your true self by changing everything about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say for Gen Spect. There's so many different directions to go, and I'm a fount of little opinions on this topic.
Why this topic? Why does it irritate you?
I think it is, gosh, let me count the ways. It's about the triumph of ideology over reality, and that gives me the willies. And it's also, in its spirit, authoritarian, because we're told that if we ever notice that the emperor underneath that dress is still a man, then we're still meant to play along. All the pronouns in the emails. I mean, I would never do that. And it is a theater, and it's a gesturing. It's confirming a lie, okay? That we need pronouns in emails to know what sex each other is. We don't. And this whole business of journalists getting with the ideological program and referring to male rapists as she, it makes my skin crawl. and it's all over the place. There's an um, a quasi-governmental organization in the UK that enforces journalistic standards, and it is one of these standards that you have to use people's preferred pronouns in text, and it just horrifies me. And
Are
so,
you
and it
still
also
in?
puts us all through this tiresome mental
Yeah.
gymnastics. When you're reading this, you have to keep translating. It's like reading a different dialect or even a slightly different language, because you have to keep flipping the sexes in order to
Yeah.
make sense of the story.
Which wastes more time and
Yeah.
mental energy, more
Yes, exactly.
cycles. Are
So
you
that's,
still in?
if we circle back to that point
Yeah.
about inefficiency or waste, my biggest concern about this topic is that I'm too concerned about it.
Oh.
Like, right? Which goes for the whole identity politics ball of wax. Am I wasting my life? So much of this stuff is transparently ludicrous and will ultimately be defeated and mocked in the future, and not necessarily very long from now. So is this is my sustained opposition to these ideas, is this throwing my life away? And I think that's been a live issue for me for over 10 years. I mean, I made my big international mark by opposing the concept of cultural appropriation, especially in the arts and most particularly in fiction. And therefore, I have been asked over and over and over again to comment on an issue that I find um, utterly ungripping. That is, it's dumb. It's a dumb idea. But then now I have expended enormous amounts of energy trying to defeat a transparently dumb idea, and that
Yeah.
and that you know
It's like
that's the ultimate waste for me.
yeah, it's some sort of Grecian mythological inversion of Don Quixote, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of going, the windmills, like they're transparent. Like everybody's like erecting these windmills that are like made out of jello. And like you have to continually go in there and poke them and
Yes,
shine a light on them till they
I have
melt.
to say that's a very good analogy. You should keep that one.
Well, yeah, it's out there in the other. But so I understand that. That's a really cool concern to have, wasting your time on nonsense. But again, I think that there's something underneath that. You brought up the wastefulness of it, that if society is wasting so many resources on such an issue as this, that's a mark of degeneracy. It's a mark of being unmoored.
Yes.
In a broader sense. So there's what are like the deeper psychological or sociopolitical lessons that you've learned about why we're disconnected, why we continually disconnect from truth on a variety of levels,
Mm-hmm.
economically, spiritually, sexually, so on and so forth.
Well, I think this is an example of classic decadence. It is what we call a first world problem. It is a kind of withdrawal from the real physical world. It is all about self and self-fulfillment. It's narrowing the lens, and it's very tight, and what we used to call navel gazing. And therefore the big project that whole families and now our whole society is engaged in, sorting out the special little feelings about their sex, or for particular individuals, very expensively sorting it out, and often with children who just don't know anything and aren't fully formed yet, both medically and psychically. They don't know who they are. Of course not. They're children. They're not supposed to know. And and for this to be the project is embarrassing. Okay, it's not good for the kid, and I don't think it's good for the adults either. And I think that we leave the adults out of the discussion too often because it's easier to get sympathy about, de facto child abuse than it is adult abuse. I mean, offering this answer to adults is just as false as offering it to children. But I think it is a sign of a culture that's spoiled, that has gone inward, and that has disconnected from the ordinary facts of being alive, of being born, living a life, and dying. And also, I think it's a sign of growing anthropocentric arrogance. So we don't give much credence anymore to exterior reality or other elements in the universe. Everything's about us, and we control everything, and we can manifest as who or what we want. Our heads are all powerful. I think this has been encouraged by the digital world, which by definition disconnects you from your physicality, this whole thing of having avatars. And that creates a mentality that the self is wholly self-made, self-realized, and you are not stuck with all the things that you were born into, which we previously might have regarded as immutable. That you can, it's a great enlargement of the big American lie, honey, you can be anything. No, you can't. It's just not true. And I think that our vulnerability to the climate change narrative is another evidence of that kind of species arrogance, that we think we can dial the temperature of the planet up and down depending on what we do. And I'm not persuaded, partly because it fits a little too conveniently into this anthropocentric narrative. And which also fits certain religious views, always putting mankind at the center of the universe. If you ever look up at the sky, if you get away from the urban light effects, you start realizing maybe we aren't. And I always find that something of a relief. I'm not sure I want to be the center of the universe. But we live in a time, I mean, that especially certain technological advances have convinced humans that they can do anything, that they can be anything. There's a very smudgy line between the ability to do anything and be anything. Because what's the first thing you want to do if you can do anything? Be anything. And this trans thing is all a part of that. And then, it's like big surprise. Oh gosh, I had a vaginoplasty and it's infected and I'm in terrible pain. And watch this. It turns out your body is not all in your head. And one of the failures of this movement, and I think this is in relation to sex in general, and by that I mean intercourse, etc., as well as what we now call gender, a word I boycott. That there's an impulse to literalize fantasy, right? To make it real, to make it tangible, so that if you like fantasizing about having a threesome, then you have to have a threesome. And I think this is often a terrible mistake. It's one way of killing the fantasy if you actually go out and find two other people. I mean, maybe it occasionally works, but I think very commonly it doesn't. And it's just awkward and doesn't get you off. Whereas the thinking about it really gets you off. I mean, we underestimate the power of fantasy. Fantasy can be absolutely intoxicating and transporting. And then when it's over, you can just go make dinner. There's no awkwardness with these people in the room that you don't, it turns out, like very much. And so, look, I have no problem with the gynophiles who, men who like to imagine themselves as women. Fine, whatever gets you off in your head doesn't cost anything, doesn't cost us anything. But why do you have to literalize that? Why do you have to embody all the time this thing that gets you off in your head? And I just think it's a mistake in relation to sex in general, that we don't give enough, we don't leave well enough alone. We can't just think about things in an exciting way and not have to make it real. And this is a having to make something real. And besides which, fantasies change. So you're nailing down a fantasy that may go away, and then you're stuck with, having chopped your breasts off.
That literalization of fantasy is could be the effect that not a lot of people are good dreamers. There's not a lot of good writers. A lot of people are very poor writers, very poor dreamers, very poor imaginers, and the path towards literalization is kind of a vulgar way of interpreting and manifesting your fantasies, because you're not that good at convincing yourself.
Well, the move toward the visual beyond text, and I'm mostly a fiction writer, is a form of this literalization, because when you read, you form images, often kind of shifting and vague. But you're the filmmaker. Whereas when you watch video, you are just the passive audience, and they have made concrete these images. And so there's always a funny loss between the adaptation, a novel, for example, and its video adaptation. I know avid readers often feel violated by it's the same thing. It's the literalizing of the mental images, and they're going to differ. And the concreteness of the video will overwrite your fragile interior versions of things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even really good adaptations like Edith Wharton's Age of Innocence, which I think that's a very fine adaptation.
Does Scorsese do that one?
I think you're right.
Yeah, with
it has
Winona Ryder and Daniel Day-Lewis.
It has overwritten my experience of reading the novel.
Yeah.
When I think of that novel, I think of the film, and I'm sure that's a standard experience.
Yeah. You mentioned departing from the urban lights and sounds and noises and beholding, the vault of heaven, and how that recalibrates one's relationship with reality. We were talking about the separation of us from reality, because there's so much technology and we can manifest all these different dreams, and with AI, it'll become more and more quickening to, throw in some prompts and not do that mental energy of projecting your own visual. I wonder how that's going to affect people's dreaming capabilities. But do you think that the disconnection from reality followed from the disconnection from the transcendent? that we cut ourselves off from God, and then we cut ourselves off from reality. There was prior to modernity, there was a rather rigid and universal concept that God created the world, and man was created in God's image. So man was a lesser being, but reflected God. And then God created order, morality, and there were consequences to violating God's law. And once we cut that off, then we put man at the center of the world. So I'm wondering what your take on, and it's funny because people such as yourself, myself, who shy away from orthodoxy, we get so far and then we're like, oh, but there's a certain level of, at least on a social level, Dawkins said, cultural Christian, you want the Christian morality, even though you don't want to internalize the Christian proceduralism and doctrine, but there's still like a necessary relationship between man as a communal animal and that superstructure, that mythology, that orchestrates proper behavior, and then from that reality can be engaged with. I'm wondering what the loss of religion for you, what the loss of religion's effect is on these different movements of anthropocentric fantasization, the cult of personality, the cult of happiness, and where do we go, and can we go back? Is there any desire on your part to say, well, maybe a little bit of Christian boarding school is kind of good. Maybe the 10 Commandments might be a little good for kids to learn.
Well, I would be an odd person to advocate a return to traditional religion, having just told you that story about rejecting my parents' religion. Of course, if in my twilight years I found God, I imagine that my parents, who are no longer with us, would be very gratified. And I don't think it's going to happen. And I'm a little frustrated with what has become a commonplace argument in the center, right of center world, that we've lost faith. We need to return to Catholicism or Christianity. And there are certain key figures who have professed their newly found Christianity, and which is fine. I'm happy for them if that's what's gratifying. In philosophy, it is not impossible to create a humanist set of moral principles that do not require a God to justify them. They are in the interests of us as humans, as people who want to live in a society that isn't murderous or hopelessly unfair, or I will say that a purely humanist morality is a little boring. It's flat. It doesn't have magic, right? It doesn't require a leap of faith. It's kind of ordinary and plodding, and then it's like it has.
Why could you define that? Like, why would it be this way? Just like treat each other nicely.
Yeah.
That's what you want for yourself.
The golden rule, etc.
Yeah.
Treat people as you would want to be treated.
Yeah.
Which
do whatever you want as long as it doesn't violate anybody else's happiness or
right. Well, which is basically the libertarianism.
Yeah. But it doesn't scale because it's not just boring. It just doesn't. I don't think it's designed for human psychology. Bookish people who are smart and self-disciplined can get away with it and live within that, but I don't see how does it translate to story, to
well,
society,
this is what we're talking about. This is what I meant by it doesn't have magic. It doesn't have anything otherworldly about it. It There's nothing about it that calls you to something mysterious, and it's a crap story, right? It's also a steady state story. Like it's just a community that works and just sits there. And nobody likes stories that just sit there. In fact, that is the definition of not being a story. Right? You just don't do anything.
Once
And
upon a time, happily ever after.
I mean, to divert to my favorite subject, which isn't trans but immigration. That's why on a narrative level nobody is ever sympathetic with the native population. They're literally not going anywhere, right? It's their story just sits there, and their story only starts because stranger comes to town, right? Then we have a story, but they're not protagonists; they're just antagonists, and so yeah, I mean, I wrestle with this religion thing because I understand the process by which, in our newly godless Western world, people are constantly substituting things that are extremely dumb for God. You know, it became a cliche almost instantaneously that wokeism is a religion. It is a faith. And it's a basket of beliefs. It's not just one. So that it's a catechism. And the passion that this package of convictions elicit from its believers, it doesn't make they're not dry political beliefs. It doesn't have this right texture. It's people get hysterical, you know, and this is religious fervor. And also the demonization of the opposition is also religious. You're opposing the devil, not people who disagree with you, that you have a dry, boring conversation with and and end up begging to differ and going your separate ways. No, the opposition must be vanquished. So and so this is, I guess, you know, given the kind of psychology that you are referring to, and I this is going to keep happening. And the only thing that more worrisome than wokeism or whatever we want to call it is what comes next, because something else will come next. And this is what I meant about trans being, as an issue, being frightening, is that people will believe anything, right? And so we're just living in this constant state of social vulnerability to the next wonky thing coming along. Now, maybe it'll be, you know, the return of hula hoops. I hope so.
Yeah.
Could be even worse.
Yeah. Well, I don't see many fringe hula hoopists like gaining surprising, shocking support out there in the in the political sphere.
And
What's
also,
your relation?
you know, I just wanted to make the point that I have to take myself to task on the opposition to identity politics, because I've got my own religious energy out of it and my own sense of membership of a faith community, right? It started out pretty lonely, but gradually the opposition to woke, and not necessarily Trumpism. I think we know about whom we are speaking, because it's all over the internet. It's also a kind of dependency. It's where I'll keep it to myself. I still derive a lot of energy from knocking this stuff down, and I get a lot of column inches out of it. And
Tearing down those Jello windmills.
Yeah, tilting at those windmills. The lime flavored ones are especially disgusting.
With chunks of spam sometimes. if I can switch gears, I think we can, this could be additive to our conversation, but what's your relationship as a fiction writer to inspiration, to the magic of creating from yourself other things, other worlds, other entities, even if they're just scripts? Like, what's that relationship like?
Well, I'm very oriented toward the external world. Um, that's where I draw my inspiration, is stuff happening outside of myself. And I think as I have progressed as a writer and a person, I am less interested in myself. I'm still self-interested. That is, I still pursue my self-interest, but I am not the source of eternal fascination to myself anymore. And therefore I'm less likely to be using my work in nonfiction or fiction to psychoanalyze myself, or even necessarily to tell stories of what has happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Is the
and
modality of your fiction inquisitive or proclamatory? Are you exploring an idea, exploring the world, or are you chasing? Is it open or is it, that
open or
makes
closed.
sense? Or open
Um,
or outward?
I think especially just because of the times, uh, I'm more inclined to start in a in a semi-closed position. But if and and certainly writing columns, I mean, you can't just be open
Yeah.
in with 1,000 words. You
Yeah.
have to say something firmly. Um, and if you address opposing arguments, you do so briefly and firmly,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a form. Uh, in fiction, I have I want to write good books, if I may be simplistic. And my instincts are are more artistic than dogmatic. If I am writing in a closed state, it's not likely to be very good.
Hmm.
And and therefore, and this is not something that I have to sit myself down and force myself to be more understanding or more holistic about an issue. It's just going to happen. Uh, uh, as I've admitted on more than one occasion now, my new novel, which is all about immigration, is more balanced than I meant it to be.
That's sad.
Well, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, no.
Just the way
When
it
when
came out. I
when
just,
yeah. Somebody was saying there's this Amazon series called Man in the High Castle, which I believe was alternative history where Nazis won and somehow America became a Nazi stronghold.
yeah, I've
And
watched,
the writers unintentionally made the antagonist too sympathetic, and so they canceled the show because you could see the world through his lens, through like, and Nazi is a stand-in, as Spielberg said, for evil. Like that's just the
Mhm.
cinematic stand-in for evil. So you're not allowed to humanize that. But with immigration, I'm wondering, by balance, does does the word or the concept of humanization or sympathy, like it was just too balanced? What do you mean by it was more?
Well, I'm an immigration restrictionist out here in the nonfiction world.
Yeah.
But in fiction, uh, the much more pro-immigration
But
perspective
it's not a policy. In
intuitively.
fiction, it's a story. It's not policy. You're not
Story,
making a,
that's just
yeah,
it. So you're talking about characters, and the
yeah.
characters, you know, they're they're ambivalent. They're not good and evil. They're not
Hmm.
walking in policy positions. And that makes, I mean, and also, that's a relief because a no fiction reader wants to sit down with policy positions. That's what the
Yeah,
newspaper's for.
yeah,
So I don't want to write that, and they don't want to read it, and that's the
yeah.
deal.
Well, this is an interesting point. I speak a lot with psychologists because I find their work fascinating and meaningful. But they have a stance towards somebody in psychological distress where they try to be non-judgmental. They suspend judgment in that box of the client, or the psychologist, the sessions. And that's good. Like, it's good to have a place where people can be not judged and work through their issues, openly. But if that non-judgmentalism like escapes that lab, escapes that form, then it destroys society. Similarly, in
Mm,
fiction, it's very important for us to understand and humanize as much as possible, to really revel in the, not the authenticity, but the complexity and the livid complexity even of these different experiences. But once that mindset, and that's why I think a lot of media personalities, a lot of the liberal Democrats by nature, are like, why do you care about a trans person? Why can you not sympathize? Why do you care about these immigrants? Why can't you sympathize? So that openness, which is really good within certain domains,
mm,
escaping the laboratory of the theater, destroyed society, because you can't have a society that functions with order if everybody's sympathetic, and that leveling, that leveling dynamic, that's kind of feminine in its kind of in its aesthetic, like very like egalitarian, at least, to
mhm,
back away from the genderization of it. It's really good in families. Communism works in a family as long
mhm.
as there's a strong authority structure. But society will be leveled if that becomes the predominant ideology. So it's just interesting that as somebody who is creative, such as yourself, you have this openness when it comes to art, but you have to have a closeness when it comes to reality, and you
Yeah.
have to be able to be able to switch and go between those two modalities. And I think that the lack of education, or the lack of proper educement of our young to be able to hold on to these different states and to be able to separate the psychologist's office from the work office. You see a lot of complaints about Gen Z because they think everything's a trauma center, and they're always like, they don't want to have any stress because everything should be this non-judgmental space. But that's not reality. We can't get anything done. So I think, yeah, I wonder what your thoughts are on that, being open in one, when facing the world in one way, and then more proclamatory or
Yeah.
proclamatory when,
Yeah. Whatever.
yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Uh, well, that's one of the ironies of this whole progressive movement is, on the one hand, they are promoting a complete lack of judgment, which has resulted in a refusal to regard drug addiction as bad, right? It's just a lifestyle choice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Constantly changing the language around homelessness because, on the one hand, it's a problem, and on another, it's a lifestyle choice. And how these people ended up on the street, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just, that's the kind of leveling openness that you're talking about. And it dovetails with the elimination of the norm, right? Because norms are prescriptive, and there is no more prescription. Everything you do is fine. Now, that ultimately results in a completely lawless society. You can't ha have laws because everything you do is fine.
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're a murderer, and that's just your truth.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. It's your
Um,
identity. You're a
right.
serial killer. Yeah.
You're being authentic,
Yeah.
right? So, and I said there's a tension because on the one hand, there's all this permissiveness. You can have any kind of sexual relationships you want, um, all the drugs, everything. There's no being out of your mind is fine, right? Because there's no norm, right? So we're neurodiverse, and that's
Yeah.
completely non-judgmental, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being a schizophrenic. There's nothing wrong with raving on the street and threatening to push people under the subway train. Um, but on the other hand, they're
Hmm.
incredibly judgmental, right? The progressive left and and um, and bossy and and authoritarian, and they're going to tell you what you can and cannot do, and they are very judgmental. If you're outside this
Hmm.
special protected sphere of the people of their concern, they're
Yes.
fucking vicious, right? They're
Hmm.
predatory. They're they are in their own way murderous. And in fact, a lot of if you go to a lot of the protests, if you take a look at, the pro-Palestine, anti-Israel protests,
Hmm.
the emotions emanating from these people are not kindness and sweetness and lack of judgment and concern for those who are vulnerable. No, it's hostility, it's anger, it's menace, right? It's one of the reasons that Trump is getting Columbia to pay, what is it, $200 million for allowing anti-Semitism on the Columbia campus,
Hmm.
because that's what it was. I mean, these feelings, they're not cuddly feelings. They're,
They're mama bear.
yeah, they're aggressive,
Indiscriminate. Yeah.
indiscriminately aggressive,
Yeah.
and oriented toward mob behavior.
Hmm.
So it's a weird Janus-faced kind of movement.
But on the other side, the rising, I don't think fascism is the right word. We need a different political
Yeah, let's not
mythology.
use that word.
But the the desire for order, for norms, the no longer being allergic to intolerance, right? If I may make a really lugubrious phrase,
Kind of
had
multiple negatives there, but
yeah, they need to be that is a direct consequence of absolute liberation, egalitarian, indiscriminate malice toward the outgroup, the sacralization or the lifting up of the downtrodden, the victim,
mhm.
and then the victimization and assault on the norm. We'll have like there's a back and forth going on, and I'm wondering, once this one thing runs out, what is the tempering force to not snap back toward indiscriminate intolerance or too narrowing? I don't know if it's possible or not, but a too narrowing of social norms, like a return to strict orthodoxy, that which you might not have had a super strict background, but you fled whatever degree of strictness was there.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go back to a world where I'm forced to go to church.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not too worried about our becoming um, Handmaid's Tale. I think that's a false worry.
Hmm.
Um, I don't even think most people are actually afraid of it because that's what I mean by false worry. But it's
Hmm.
it's just an image that progressives like to wave as, if you don't do what we say, then that's the alternative.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't see there's a big going back on sexual permissiveness. Although you know, to return to
Well, if liberal
promoting
democracy,
marriage and family.
yeah.
I'm surprised to hear myself say that because I grew up in the 1960s, and so I would never have thought that I would be pushing this kind of stuff. But yeah, somebody's got to do it, and I am married, and I like being married, and I think that it's
Hmm.
an important relationship for people to pursue. Maybe everyone is not suited to it, but I think it makes sense for it to be the norm, which it is decreasingly the case. It is fewer and fewer people are getting married. Uh, I don't happen to have children by choice, but I also don't think that can be the default normal either. I mean, that's just the end of your civilization if everyone is like me. So don't do as I did, do as I say. Go out and have a bunch of kids,
Hmm.
please.
Yeah. Well,
In my
if
defense, my brother had four, so he had mine.
okay, you get it evened
So do
out.
I get a free pass?
The the direction in which liberal democracy in the West is headed towards permissiveness and all these other tack-on effects of the sexual revolution. Not only can it not reproduce, but that permissiveness in domains such as immigration is going to, on a game theory level, going to be the end of liberal democracy in the West because Islam is just going to outcompete it. It's going to be much stronger, and it's going to have intolerance in a way that we find distasteful, but that intolerance itself is
It
hardy
has
enough to,
power. It
it
has
has
power.
power. Yeah. It has power. So I don't know. I mean, this is a really big question. I just don't know how liberal democracy in the West in general, without hardening itself somehow and drawing lines and suspending sympathy
Mm.
for its enemies, how it's going to not succumb to a stronger, more hardy ideology.
I think you're right, and I just came off living in the UK for 36 years. So
I was wondering where you ended up.
yeah, I recently moved to Portugal, but I'm familiar up to the neck with Britain, and therefore I have had a very different experience of immigration as different from most Americans. Uh, the UK has gone from a, a, a small minority population, used to have practically nobody, and then post World War II, there were a couple of, there were a couple of waves of small groups of people, but it was pretty minimal,
Mm-hmm.
basically a white society. But in the last 25 years, that is fantastically transformed.
The last 10 has been insane.
Yeah, it's been insane. And the vast majority of these people are Muslim. And
It's not even suicidal, it's murderous on account of the I mean I don't know the word what side it would be CIDE, but the political class is killing their constituents by just wiping it out, ethnically wiping out the British.
yes, well, I mean, the way it's going in most of Europe and the United States, we're all headed toward a minority white status, and that's supposed to be just fine. We're supposed to actually celebrate that. We're celebrating our own loss of dominion,
Hmm.
because they're not really our countries after all, which we don't say about anyone else's countries, by the way. Uh, that is a huge it is a seismic transformation of our societies. And I think Americans underappreciate how seismic that is when a significant proportion of these newcomers are Muslim. It is an admittedly and even festively territorial, uh, predatory religion that wants to take over the world. I mean, it's just like
It has to.
it's like a
Yeah.
cartoon, right? It's like Marvel Comics,
Hmm.
and and you import sizable numbers of these people at your peril, and it's even Sam Harris has been quite forthright on this point. Um, but in the United States, that's just that makes you sound prejudiced and basically you're a terrible person. But
That's changing.
is it?
Yeah.
If you know anything about Islam, I mean, the weird union between the progressives and Islamists is just blows my mind.
Yeah.
They're
They
so
call, yeah.
antithetical in terms of what they believe. But I find it a very distasteful religion. I it's repressive. It treats women like dirt. Um,
It doesn't, it's not good for the men either. It
it's
turns
not
them
good for the
into,
men either, and
yeah.
it's not good for education. I mean, the whole idea of just spending all your time reading the Quran. I wouldn't have any more regard for that than spending all your time reading the Bible. I mean, or the Torah. I mean, in some ways, the Hasidim and the Islamists are mirror images of each other. Both in both of them, the men don't do anything productive.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
no, I mean, basically, you don't you don't want this religion in your country, and um,
It's a jealous God. You say you don't want to spend you don't think it's good to spend your whole life reading the Bible, but all of Western literature is a conversation that pings between the Bible and the Greeks. It's arcing between those two
oh, I probably am
poles.
too, and I'm not even aware of it.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny because one of the tiny losses for me as a fiction writer or as a writer, um, as someone who was raised in the Christian tradition. So I know the stories. So I'm now increasingly writing for an audience that doesn't know those stories
Yeah.
and therefore doesn't get my references.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I talk about, this is my Gethsemane. What's that? Right? What's
Hmm.
that? Or, making a comparison of uh so, it's like cutting in half
Yeah.
Solomon's baby, or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
many familiar Bible stories. Anyone raised in the Christian tradition knows all this stuff, knows the whole Christ story, knows what it means to be a doubting Thomas.
Hmm.
All of this, it just falls on deaf ears now. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're under a certain age, you did
You have to
not.
swap out all your Bible references for Lord of the Rings references. You just have to
Yeah,
adapt with the
yeah,
times.
and somehow
And the movies,
it doesn't have
specifically,
the same
nonetheless.
gravity.
So what are you working on now? What's the name of your latest novel, and is it about to be manifest in the world, or is it
Yeah, it comes out
recently?
in early February. It's called A Better Life.
A Better Life.
Hmm.
And it's a story about immigration, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's set in New York during the migrant crisis of 23 to 24.
23 to 24. Wait, 19 or 20? 23 to 20.
2020, very recent.
Okay. I guess you kind of intimated that something surprised you about it, but do you get shocked by your stories? Like, where you're like, what the heck was that about?
No, I don't think I do. Uh,
Surprised?
I sometimes, well, I plan my novels out very carefully, so they're not going to surprise me in the same way that maybe you mean,
Yeah.
because I know what happens.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but there's usually some aspect of it that comes out slightly differently than I might have anticipated before I made it into a
Hmm.
thing. And this one was most of all that balance, because it rests on your interpretation of one character. And there's
Hmm.
plenty of evidence on both sides. Either she is a lovely person, industrious, affectionate, uh, innocent.
Deserving of regard. Yeah.
Yeah. Or she is a scheming, devious, murderous liar. And what was interesting about writing this story is I have no idea what the answer is, right? I
Huh.
ended up keeping a position of perfect authorial neutrality of a sort
Hmm.
that I wasn't sure I was capable of.
Hmm.
So I'm rather pleased with myself, because out here, again, in the world, I am very judgmental. And that might have extended to my own characters. But in this case, I have no idea which version of that woman's character is correct. And that means I wrote the book as I conceived it, which is I wanted it to be completely ambiguous. And I think I did it.
Hmm.
And that extends to the politics of the book. There's a lot of talk about immigration, sometimes by immigrants. And some of that talk by immigrants is cynical. Like, you are pushovers. We walk right into your country and then you give us a place to live. You're idiots. Right. And some of it is actually very well argued in a more sincere, from a moral or social perspective.
Hmm.
Um, Even like, you know, this is set in a family, and the migrant who's come to live with them through the aegis of a New York City program that was proposed but never came to fruition observes that the three grown children have not had any kids. And, this big house there that the mother and son are living in uh, won't have anybody in it.
Hmm.
No migrants, no people. And she's totally right.
Hmm.
And she's willing to have children.
Hmm.
None of these other characters, by the author's design, of course, um, that's part of the balance. None of these
Hmm.
other characters is reproducing.
Hmm.
So, yeah. And so that was interesting, because I have very strong views on immigration. I have watched close up while all over Europe, basically Europe is committing suicide. It is committing cultural and even economic suicide by letting in huge numbers of people who are fifth columns and are actively hostile to the civilization they have just invaded. So I have these, you know, they're not subtle views.
Hmm.
Uh, but so I did not come to this book and this topic in the same spirit that I came to Belfast, right?
Hmm.
I had no views on the Troubles before I got there. Uh, so the writing of the book was actually a kind of becoming, you asked about closed and open, it was gradually becoming more open.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think on the last line, on the last page, it ends it ends on
Wow.
perfectly balanced. And I loved that. And I
Yeah.
guess that was the big surprise.
That's
I loved
satisfying.
that. It was very sad. It was an almost physical feat. It was like a juggling act that ends just like that, with the ball on
Hmm.
the tip of your finger. And And it was very gratifying because that is good art. And I
Hmm.
care more about the art than I do about the dogma.
Yeah. Speaking of dogma, that strange death of Europe, that suicide of the West, the reaction to it, the cheap reaction is discovering some Eurocentrism or some Caucasian pride, which is kind of ridiculous, and I don't think it scales. It's kind of a joke on the internet, these internet Nazis or whatever, like what
Mhm.
about the white? What about our pride in our heritage? It's really important, pride in your heritage and a worshipful regard for your heritage. But that's cheap. What needs to happen is duty, like the duty to your forefathers. And that duty is in producing more, is in having children, is in figuring out how to have stable family relationships, paying into your community, producing more and more children to fill up the ruins of the civilization.
Mhm.
It's really cheap to talk Nazi rhetoric or whatever, even if it's not Nazi, just, white pride or whatever that would be. That's really cheap stuff. And that's not the answer. Um, what's the answer is actually what you were pointing to with the duty to your mother and your father to have more children.
Yes. And I grew up in a generation that laid waste to duty.
That's the
And
sin of the boomers. I think that's.
it's absolutely the sin of the boomers. And I'm part of the problem on that point.
Mm,
I did not have children because I rejected duty. I did not want all the problems and lack of control
mm,
uh, and responsibility and duty to these people whom I did not know, and I wasn't sure I would like them.
mm.
And if you look at my books, I think one of the things that runs as a thread through them is an agonized relationship to duty, a respect for it and a rejection of it. It's
Yeah.
like I don't want it, don't put it on me. I don't want to join the army, right? Um, but I also acknowledge
Mm,
that a society without duty is it doesn't sustain itself, and it also tends toward state control of everything because we farm out our duties,
yeah.
right?
And
So,
results in all the problems we covered in the first half of this interview: the navel gazing, narcissistic obsession with affluenza and
mhm.
self manifestation, authenticity. But it's not rooted,
And
it's
I
not
don't know what's
grounded.
going to turn this around. I mean, maybe it will take a facile pro-white ideology. It doesn't appeal to me any more than it appears to appeal to you. Uh,
I don't think it.
it's, as you said, cheap. It's the same identity politics that I find
It's
is,
nostalgic, not romantic. And
yeah,
romantic, I mean like deeply evocative of following through on duty.
but what's going to bring duty back? Because duty has an onerous side. It does often over the years produce deep interior satisfaction.
Yeah.
I think that raising children, unless it goes horrifically wrong, which, that's one of the things you risk, uh, is one of the most satisfying human experiences.
Hmm.
And um, and it helps pay back the duty that your parents undertook.
Hmm.
If nothing else, if you're still here, they must have fed you something.
Hmm.
Um, and the boomers, that's me, wanted to have cake and eat it. So they get their parents being dutiful to them, and they don't want to repay it. I mean, ours was the generation that first started having considerably fewer children,
Hmm.
And I I uh, I have got away with rejecting most beauty, and maybe toward the end of my life, I will learn to rue that. I mean, I got away with not really having to take care of my parents, for example. They had enough money to hire someone full time to live with them, an illegal immigrant, right?
Hmm.
Joke's on me,
Yeah.
who eventually did get naturalized,
Hmm.
but and then had to start paying Social Security and taxes. It was
Hmm.
actually terrible.
Oh no.
Um, and I feel I got away with something there. You
Yeah.
know, I did not have to take my parents into my own home, for example, and I didn't have to change their diapers. The people I live next to in Portugal now. I mean, the guy moved home from having worked in Canada and for years changed his own mother's diapers. I mean,
Hmm.
that's beauty. And and I'm in awe of it. And at the same time, I have that double reaction. I wouldn't want to do that, right?
Hmm.
I'm sure glad I didn't have to do that. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the fiction, that is a tension in me. And
Yeah.
I've always been someone who wants to get out of duty.
Hmm.
But then I know that there's a price to pay in having escaped it.
Yeah.
Not always apparent, but there's there's probably a depth of feeling that I'm being deprived of, and a complexity of relationship that I don't quite enjoy.
Well,
And
on a social level, when this scales up, it goes back to what we were talking about these Jello windmills, like unmoored from the difficulties of duty and the honor that it bequeaths to you, the self-respect and the respect,
yeah,
the social respect.
that's a very good choice of word.
We
Honor.
become obsessed with these ridiculous, when we like the sexual revolution, it normalized the pill, it normalized abortion, and then it made sex meaningless, and then it's just genders like, oh, sex doesn't mean anything because we're not using it as intended, we're using it for pleasure, so why not switcheroo? There's all that sexual energy and it's got nowhere to go except back into your reflect back into yourself.
Hmm.
And so the whole thing just becomes more and more ridiculous. And being able to see that tension, and I'm very similar to you in my life choices, saying, well, I didn't sink myself into children. Now, thank God I have step kids and I'm learning those hard lessons.
Mm.
I'm playing catch up with adulthood now, but I have to wonder. I do have to wonder. Like, was it not doing that? Did I spend my time wisely? Did I invest my all that extra stuff that I didn't spend on other children? Did I spend it wisely? Did I
Yes.
pay it back somehow? Maybe just culturally back into my environment.
Well, I have available to me the option of regarding my books as
Yeah.
my contribution. I I I really reject the metaphor of books as children. They're not children. Um, uh, but I think, in a different universe, I could have had both. And
Hmm.
it's not the same kind of contribution. And while I have done my best and I am proud of my books and they are what I have achieved, that's it. Aside from various relationships, that's what I've got to show. And that's definitely what I did instead of having children. I think that my imagining that I could only do one or the others was a false choice.
Hmm.
Uh, my main problem was I just never had a desire for children.
Hmm.
And I and I maybe you're not supposed to be acting on desire, but it seemed to me that's what other people were doing.
Mm.
Wanted to get pregnant. I never wanted to get pregnant.
Mhm.
Um, so I felt that I was dealing with a certain a nature that I did not have complete control over, not very maternal.
Mhm.
But I have been gradually horrified by the fact that that way of being and that way of thinking and that way of opting for some other occupation other than parenthood has become commonplace and almost the default. And that's the death of worlds.
Mhm.
So
It's end
I
of histories.
yeah, I have become aggressively pro-natalist,
Hmm.
which considering that I made my original fictional mark on a book about maternal ambivalence, I
Hmm.
find comical, and I
That's
mean, the
beautiful in
jokes
a
on,
way.
yeah.
Yeah, no, in an ironic novelist sort of way. That's a
Hmm.
beautiful turn. So your book comes out in February, this future February. Uh, do you have the seeds of another world
I've been toying with,
germinating? To
yeah,
go
I've
back to
been
the fertility analogy.
toying with the idea of doing something to do with trans, and honestly, something in me just rebels.
You know, you can take the Protestant out of the Protestantism, but you can't take the Protestantism out of the Protestant.
My problem is the whole issue just makes me ill.
Hmm.
And the idea of living with this material every day
Yeah.
uh, is forbidding. I'm just not, and also you talked about that open close thing. I'm totally closed.
Yeah.
That's a lot of it. You know, I cannot imagine writing a book that would, end up exploring the wonderful experience of discovering that you're really the other sex and turning into a butterfly. It's just,
Yeah. You don't think you can land it on a pen?
no, 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 would not happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it could only be written as a tragedy.
Hmm. As a public intellectual, sorry for the term, who is your audience and what's your duty to them,
Hmm.
if you have that
Yeah, interestingly,
sense?
I of course don't think of it in terms of duty. Um, well, I have a column in The Spectator in Britain. Uh, Especially when I write about the United States, it will appear in the monthly version of The Spectator here called, however, unfortunately, The Spectator World.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not quite sure who they are. They tend to be middle-aged or older, but there's a small cadre of more conservative young people.
Hmm.
Um, it's the people who are upset about the progressive left. And by the way, the progressive left has also taken over the UK. So
Oh, yeah.
it's not
With a
simply
vengeance.
passive observation of the US. And I guess in terms of duty, okay, one of the things that I care most about is that the columns are well written. Um, because
Hmm.
I it that that alone makes any position more persuasive. And there's a little circularity there because it is part of being well written by definition is it's persuasive.
Hmm.
But the well written also means it has a sense of humor, doesn't use the same word over and over again like Donald Trump. Um, it's well organized. It has texture. It can pull up with a light touch. I often end it on a light touch, or either that, or if you've done something lighter, land on something really. heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it needs to work rhythmically. And then I have to control myself sometimes to stop, not always write about the same issues over and over again. Most
Mm-hmm.
importantly, I mean, it's hard to not write about immigration over and over again. That's what I've been absorbed in fictionally for the last year and a half. I've been obsessed with immigration since about 1990. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it is the issue in Britain. It's huge. Um,
It needs to. Do you think that the media class is giving it its proper due? Is it being discussed properly and enough? And
well,
is that
all over
why you?
Europe, the mainstream media wants to portray concern about immigration as far right. So all the parties that would do something about it are far right. This stuff doesn't work anymore. It's like any other label that you overuse and also isn't accurate. So on both
Mhm.
counts, it just loses its efficacy. It's like calling someone racist, and that's over. I mean, it just it has no effect.
Mhm.
And you can call my position on immigration far right, and I would yawn. It's
Mhm.
so it's not that's not working. And yeah, there's a lot of disingenuous disingenuousness in coverage of this topic. Um, it was only recently through Elon Musk that the American public really became alert to the rape gangs, Pakistani, almost overwhelmingly Pakistani rape gangs in the UK that it's been going on for decades and involves thousands of underage girls. Um, but that was exposed in the UK and it has been systematically buried.
Mhm.
And the Labour Party will sometimes dismiss this concern as, just poorly disguised bigotry. But it's a fact. It's not an opinion.
Mhm.
It's not an
Mhm.
attitude or a feeling. It's a set of real terrible stories that the state was ultimately complicit in allowing to happen. So
Do you think
yeah,
the British public will find the collective will to hold the people who allowed that and covered it up to account?
well, there's talk of an inquiry, but
Okay.
Britain holds tons of expensive inquiries. They come up with recommendations that are never instituted,
They're
and
Orwellian to the core, man.
it's
They're
it's
so proceduralist.
yeah. Uh, Inquiries are used to siphon off energy and political energy, and basically to say, see, we're doing something,
Hmm.
right? Because we had our inquiry. And the inquiries also they go on for years. And they funnel huge amounts of money to lawyers. Um, Everyone wins but the public because it changes absolutely nothing. And there have been some of these cases have gone to court. The sentences those rapists have been given have been pretty mild, and a lot of them have not been deported.
Hmm. Compared to the treatment of what the proper like native Britons and their Facebook posts and the amount of persecution, legal persecution that they
Yeah,
receive for normal
yeah,
posts.
it's what's called two-tier policing,
Absolutely.
and it's very real. And a completely different standard is applied to native Britons. And also, the UK no longer believes in freedom of speech. So, as long as someone says that what you wrote on Twitter was bigoted, then it is ipso facto bigoted, and you can be put in jail. So, I
Hmm.
think you're thinking of the uh, Lucy Connolly case.
There's several cases.
Terrible.
It's been
Yeah,
going
I'm
on for a
terrible
long time.
name, so
Yeah.
we'll see if that's correct. Um, but she wrote a furious tweet about
Burning down a hotel or
bring
something.
down, yeah, and it wasn't even put in incitement terms. It was almost like, I wouldn't even care if you
Yeah.
XXX. And she took it down 4 hours later. And who
Hmm.
cares? I mean, in that it would never pass the smell test in a U.S. court for incitement to violence. Not the way it was phrased.
Hmm.
Um, and she was given 30 months in prison, 2.5 years. It's astonishing. And that is longer than some of those Pakistani rapists.
Hmm.
I-
And yeah.
and that case has become infamous, but no matter, they won't budge. And furthermore, they have
Hmm.
treated her like rubbish because they won't let her. I mean, there are all kinds of, especially with women, the permissive prison regimes that allow you to see your family or go, see your daughter for the weekend and have more generous visitation privileges in the prison. She's been given none of that.
Hmm.
They, no, she says he has been made a political example,
Hmm.
and they are not backing down.
Hmm.
And it's ridiculous.
Hmm.
But
And
there are lots of stories like this. The police in the UK, their clearance rate on actual crimes is, maybe 4 or 5% on.
really, well, at least they got hate crimes down to up to
Oh yeah, because
95%
the hate
clearance
crime thing
rate.
is much easier, right? You just sit around reading Twitter,
Hmm.
right? And these are people who are very easily frightened. You're dealing with, mostly, white middle class people
Yeah.
who are afraid of the police and do what they're told.
Yeah. Yeah. The people who the law is most strongly used against are the ones who are
Who obey it.
most who obey it,
Mhm.
who keep in line. I don't know how it's gonna end. Is that why you fled to
One of many
Portugal?
reasons.
Yeah.
I mean,
Is the climate better to you?
actually, this spring in Portugal was ridiculously cold and rainy. That
Oh,
also
okay.
makes Britons happy to hear. But overall, it's agreeable. I think of it as my private writer's colony. It's
Mm.
um, and it's a change of pace. I I have despaired of the UK on a number of fronts. I just did a piece for the London Times about that, and you know, the immigration situation in the UK is a big turnoff. I London is now less than 37% white British. And that's a 2021 figure. And given what's been happening in the last 4 years, you can be sure it's even lower.
Hmm.
And the neighborhood where I lived was mostly North African and Middle Eastern. So lots of
Hmm.
uh, lots of Muslims. They're all living in social housing at taxpayers' expense.
Hmm.
And there I am paying those taxes.
Hmm.
And I don't like walking around in a state of resentment,
Hmm.
draining and pointless. And I just, the feeling is of just being, or was, or still is there. Nothing has changed. It just gets worse. There are all these people who've come in from somewhere else. It's not their culture. It's not their country, and they are extracting resources. It's like, well, it's parasitic, and that's not a nice environment. Um, and since I was a British taxpayer, I'm being parasitized, if that's a word, right? It's
Hmm.
like a mosquito sucking on my arm.
Hmm.
I, I wanted to get away from that. Now, there are some immigration problems in Portugal as well, but it's not as bad.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yet, or so
yeah,
far.
and the feeling is that one of the greatest civilizations in the world is destroying itself in an astonishingly short period of time. And there are other contributing factors. They're obsessed with net zero and don't have they're so they've closed all these power plants but haven't built more. They want to have everything run by electricity, but they don't have any.
Hmm.
It's just This stuff is not subtle.
No,
It's
no.
not a small dysfunction. And then there's the economy. So not only are all these immigrants coming in and are hugely dependent on the state, but then there's the domestic problem of people dependent on the state. 9 million people of working age in the UK are on benefits.
Hmm.
Now, this is a country which ostensibly only has less than 70 million people in it. By the way, I believe it's closer to 85 because they don't keep track. Um, this is based on supermarket surveys.
Oh.
Right. But still, that's a huge proportion of if that's that, even if it's 85 million, that includes old people and children. So, and that means that a huge proportion of people often claiming disability, which is very generous in the UK, much more so than just being on the dole. You can now qualify for disability just by saying you're anxious or depressed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there is a huge spike in young people claiming to be anxious and depressed
Mm-hmm.
with very little, that's unfalsifiable.
Well, I would caution people against claiming that because MAID is coming down the pike, and medical assistance in dying
Yes.
for anxiety and depression. So I'm sure there's that George Lucas pre-Star Wars movie THX 119 or something like that, where there's a counter on this guy escapes from the the colony, the worker colony, and there's this counter of how much resources they're going to spend on him before they let him go. But I think there might be a ticker on how much dole you're going to get before they're going to let you go. I don't know. I don't put it beyond them.
Well, this, this situation is, as they say, unsustainable. I mean, you can't. It's the UK's going broke.
Yeah, well, net zero means the pocketbooks
Right.
ultimately.
So, I mean, the whole place is just hurtling toward
Yeah.
some kind of apocalypse,
I
social.
was I was just there in February and in London, and it was culture shock because it just looked like Chicago. It was like, this is indistinguishable from Chicago. I ended up next to Westminster Abbey, and the cultural center of London. For some reason, this kind of stuck in my craw. They enshrined, like, there's all these saints on the face of Westminster Abbey, and they enshrined Martin Luther King Jr. in one of these little, place reliquary or something like that. I'm like, why did you adopt that?
Oh, you know perfectly well why.
Well, it's a signal of they're basically America's bitch. Like, the whole thing
Yeah.
is like they're America's
Yeah.
bitch. So our cultural icons are their cultural icons. But like there was little things about kings and lions and like these emblems of British strength, but there's nobody there to inherit the crown. And I wonder, like, America kind of has a soft, strong man in Donald Trump. I don't see any political will, but that would be the only way forward for Britain to break the spell of this globalist decay, would be a strong authority figure claiming Britain for itself and galvanizing specifically the youth to get off their duff and actually work for something and actually claim their own country back. But I don't see, because Britain, and investigating it, speaking with people, they're so enmeshed in proceduralism and bureaucracy. And then I kind of figured out, like, well, that's how they conquered the world, was through bureaucracy. They went over to India and they organized things, and they have these structures of obedience and prestige and respectability that keeps everybody kind of in line. And that's why politeness kind of governs the British elite class, and that's why they don't step over these lines of trans or immigration. They all kind of keep their ducks in the row. There's a lack of courage, and because that organizational capacity is no longer novel in the world at large, they don't have an edge on anybody else. So I don't know how it gets the soul of their country back. I don't know how a King Arthur comes, but I think that would be the only way. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm just trying to work it out as a story, like how they would turn around. And
Well, some people are trying. I don't know that it's going to succeed. You're familiar with
the
the New
Reform Party and
Party.
yeah.
I don't think Nigel Farage has the kind of uh, gravity and personal power that
Yeah.
you're talking about that would
Well,
be.
even that they cuck out to progressive dogmas at every turn because they don't want to be, they don't want to be seen as the bad guy, and the bad guy would be fascistic coded,
Mhm.
would be America first would be anathema to Britain. Britain first. What does that even mean? Like there was a debate a few months ago about what it is to be English, and it's like anybody can be English. There's no thickness of identity at all.
Oh, well, that I've written about this. This is happening all over Europe, that the what we now call the elite.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what we used to call them. What do we used to call them? Um,
The aristocracy upon a
they
time.
are gaslighting everyone in relation to history and also to um, the unifying ideology of each of these countries, the whole gestalt, the principles.
Hmm.
Uh, Traditionally, a country like Germany was full of Germans, and it was not a nation of immigrants. It had a history of morphing, and you know, there's certainly been this big influx of Turks, etc. But
Mm.
there's still a solid core understanding of what it is to be German, and it has a powerful ethnic component.
Hmm.
Things that makes you German is your parents were German and your grandparents and their parents. It has to do with lineage. It has to do with a shared history and
Hmm.
also a set of shared cultural practices and understandings, some of which even outsiders are able to elucidate. And now all of these countries are being told, no, no, this is happening in the UK. Oh, we've always been a nation of immigrants, regardless of whether that's true. In fact, it's like not true. Uh, we are a multi-faith, multicultural country, and that is our identity. And anyone can become one of us. Anyone can become French. Anyone can become German.
Hmm.
It is essentially importing an American conception of citizenship
Hmm.
and an
Hmm.
American conception of people. Now, I would maintain that even the United States does not have the conception of people that it claims to, or we're on our way to having what we've always said we have. Because now I'm getting into the territory that I probably saved for my book, but
Mm.
they're there. Um,
What is a people?
we have what is a people? What is a country? A country is more than anything is a people. Now, the United States thinks anybody can be American, and we've demonstrated that we can create unity from difference. And look at
Mm.
all the different people we've absorbed, and we're still hanging in there as a coherent culture. Well, first of all, I would contest that we are quite doing that anymore. And most of all, I would maintain, you know, that unity that I was born into uh, was partly made possible by having gone 40 solid years with virtually no immigration,
Hmm.
25 to 65. Um, and it would behoove us to take a step back and recognize that these waves of immigrants that we did eventually assimilate were all from Europe, right? So they
Well,
did languages,
some
different.
were from Africa. Let's just make
Okay,
that.
we're leaving that aside as a
Okay.
separate
Yeah.
issue.
All right.
Although I think that that's a good example of how hard it is to assimilate people who are observably different, not
Hmm.
to mention people who have a very big grudge and for good reason. Right. So we're still dealing with that. Um, and and I think we're uncomfortable acknowledging that in the main, as a people, we still have had European roots, and we are about to walk into a future where that is no longer the case. That's just one more minority fighting for resources and political power.
Hmm.
And ironically, it's that European dominated Christian
Waspish,
background,
weird, yeah, Western
right?
educated
Which
industrials.
has made the United States so attractive to many immigrants who may not share that background, but they want in on its advantages
Hmm.
and its stability and its sense of prosperity and discipline,
Hmm.
which we're
Mm.
busy destroying.
Mm.
Um, but
Both, yeah.
but we're about to have to actually have the kind of diversity that we've always claimed to have, and we haven't. So, and we have yet to see whether that's going to work as a coherent country.
Well, yeah, as a coherent country, the one thing that separates the United States from Europe, well, one major thing is just the land mass. We can segregationalize. We can, kind of break apart into. We can federalize
Yeah,
just on a land-based level.
that's what we have been.
Economically, I don't
Oh,
know,
yeah,
and
we have been doing that.
militarily, but yeah,
Yeah,
but
we have
it's
been doing that. That's what happens when you let very large numbers of immigrants in all at once. They hang out together and they atomize and they colonize particular areas, and it's their hang.
yeah. But
That's,
the Europe just doesn't have the room anywhere near the room.
well, yes.
So, you said you like landing on a light note. If we're talking about heavy things, or a heavy note, or landing on a heavy note, if we were talking about light things, where should we go? Heavier or lighter? Where should we?
I don't know. You know,
Roses or
jokes.
who's your favorite comedian?
Oh God, I can never remember anyone's name.
Yeah, I like Norm Macdonald. Yeah, I've been
I don't
watching his
know him.
clips. He just keeps it. Oh, really?
I don't
I'll have to
know.
send you his book.
Yeah. Uh,
It's a riot.
yeah. Oh, what's his name? Who offended all those people at Netflix? The
Oh,
black.
Chappelle?
Yeah, I
Dave?
think Chappelle is great. I think he's
Yeah.
great, and he can get
Ricky?
away with stuff that nobody else can. And
Yeah.
he managed to break some real ground on the trans front.
Yeah.
Uh, and a white comedian couldn't have done it. Not at that time.
Ricky Gervais.
Has done some of that.
Yeah, he's taken it there.
Yeah.
What do you do outside of living in your mind? What is your connection to reality physically? Like gardening? Do you work out? Do you punch people?
Uh, I I like the idea of punching people. Interesting way of keeping fit. And I guess there's a whole sport around that. So
There's several. Yeah.
um, I play a certain amount of tennis. Uh, I exercise one way or another every day. Not that it's very interesting or fun. Um, I'm a pretty good cook. I make us dinner every night.
Really?
Yeah. And when there is a physical project in the house, I'm the one who does it.
You're the
Uh,
spearhead.
yeah, like yesterday, I spent several hours putting together a massive wine rack that really gives away my
Your hobby.
weakness. Yeah, my hobby is Zinfandel. Um, and that was very satisfying. They look great. They're huge. Um, and I bought a product that actually works and was made in China. The drill holes are in the right place.
Okay. Yeah.
I enjoy that. Um, or the day before, I spent an hour getting the tarnish off my grandfather's silver cigarette case.
Huh.
and it was black and looked disgusting. And it became a thing of transcendent beauty. I mean, when you really bring, I used to be a metalsmith, so I do find it exhilarating to get a
Hmm.
fine finish, just gleaming, and it has almost divine powers.
Wow. Do you
So,
have before and after photos that I can put on the screen for
oh, I wish
people?
I had taken it.
Oh.
I wish I'd taken it before because it was actually repulsive. It wasn't just black; it was streaky and it looked filthy. It
Hmm.
looked like something you didn't want to touch.
Yeah, like a
And
smoker's
now,
lung.
yeah, and I really liked my grandfather, and I enjoyed the fact that toward the end of his life, he started secretly smoking, right? So it drove his daughter, my aunt, absolutely wild because he wasn't supposed to do that and it wasn't good for his health. And Jesus, he was in his 90s, leave him alone. Um, and I really enjoyed that he had that mischievous side,
Hmm.
and I hadn't spotted it before. So the cigarette case means more than just the silver. It
Hmm.
also it gleams with defiance.
Hmm. Hmm. I think you are a product of your family, for
You think so?
certainly. I don't know. I think that even the rebellion is probably a family
It's
trait.
somewhere in there. It's somewhere
Yeah.
in there. I think I owe my family a debt in some regards, but I like to think that I have picked picked the best traits and left a few of them behind.
Hmm.
I haven't succeeded in, I mean, the family, my parents tended enormously toward self-righteousness,
Hmm.
and I probably am pretty the same thing. I get self-righteous again about different things, but
Hmm.
it's the same trait.
I don't think you could be a columnist without that personality trait. I don't think a successful columnist has a
A
certain.
certain surety
Yeah.
is required.
Yes.
You can't be on the other hand too much, and
Hmm.
you have to just launch in and stick. And yeah, so not it doesn't really help to question yourself too much. Life's too short.
Hmm.
If anything, I err on the side of overconfidence. Um, and but the one thing that I am hopeful that I added to the mix is a sense of humor because my parents erred on the earnest side,
Mm.
and and I had to learn
Hmm.
I had to learn to make light of things. I had to learn a sense of humor about myself, which I hope I
Hmm.
have,
Yeah.
which begins to extend to everyone else too, quite
Hmm.
generous.
Hmm. Levity. It's the soul of wit, along with brevity.
Yeah, I mean, it just it it makes all of my interests possible because I mean, I care about stuff, but a book without a line that makes me laugh or at least smile, I can't bear. And I definitely
Hmm.
can't bear authoring one. And it's just it's an instinctive desire to, life short, don't take it too
Hmm.
seriously. Um, don't let it get you down. A lot of this stuff is just entertainment. A lot of the stuff you and I are talking about,
It's just a pastime.
entertainment. It's passing
Yeah.
the time. It's fun to throw around ideas. Uh, it's fun to make big pronouncements.
So I am enjoying speaking with you, and I don't want the conversation to end, but for reality's sake, should wrap it up. If somebody hasn't encountered your work, what is the book that you are most proud of?
Hmm.
That you would want to stand as like that you know.
The one that most people would expect me to say is We Need to Talk About Kevin. I don't tend to tout that book because that's sold the most copies and it doesn't need my help.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Very powerful
there,
movie.
yeah,
I
it
mean,
was
I
a good
saw it
job.
in the theater. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good job.
Yeah.
Books better, of course.
Of course.
I
Yeah.
would think that. Um, the next to last book I wrote, I'm especially proud of. It's called Should We Stay or Should We Go?
Hmm.
I think it's hilarious. Um, and especially considering it's about a suicide pact.
Hmm.
It's a parallel universe book where this couple vows that once they both turn 80, this is it. They're going to go out on a high note on their own terms because they've seen what happens when people get older and older and fall apart, and it's disgusting and expensive. And they're both in the medical profession, so they've
Yeah.
seen. Um, but then, that in the first chapter they turn 80. I mean, it's just whoosh whoosh. They make the vow when they're like in the early 50s, and then what are they going to do? And so that it asks that it has 12 different endings, 12
Oh.
chapters, um, exploring how different ways this might work out. And of course, it's addressing the question: should they or shouldn't they? In the first chapter, what do you do? And some of it's quite realistic. And then others is more fanciful. It gets into speculative fiction. Like there's one chapter in which they're cryogenically preserved and wake up thousands of years later. That one's especially
Hmm.
poignant because it's called Love Doesn't Freeze.
Hmm.
And not only are they alienated from the people and the place, but they have fallen out of love with each other. They don't feel anything for each other anymore. It's a little tragedy. But it takes a heavy subject and it's a light treatment.
Hmm.
It's a playful treatment, and yet it pursues its subjects with some seriousness. And I think that's the kind of work I would like to be known for.
Hmm.
And the other book that probably doesn't get as much attention because nobody wants to read about illness any more than they want to read about suicide pacts, is So Much for That, which goes back to 2009, I think. And to me, that's the most emotionally affecting book I've ever written.
For yourself, or is that in responses that
I
you've
would say for
gotten?
both me and for the readership. I mean, there are a couple scenes that I have read aloud to audiences and moved them to tears. And for a fiction writer, that's very satisfying. Uh,
Hmm.
and and as I'm reading it, I can feel it. It does it to me too. It
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
But it's not a sentimental book. But it is full of feeling. There's a big difference
Hmm.
because sentimentality is about fake feeling. Um, and this is earned feeling. And so I
Hmm.
think, you know, and also that book has a happy ending. I mean, I basically kill off almost all my characters, but it still has a happy ending. And I think that's just formally a huge accomplishment. So
Hmm.
push those two books.
I've enjoyed so much to this conversation, speaking with you, exploring these ideas. Where do people find you on the internet? I was having trouble. I guess you're not terribly on too much on social media, but I always ask people to plug their socials.
Right.
They
I'm
have
not
them.
on social media at
No.
all.
Yeah.
I boycott social media, so don't go looking. But I
Okay.
do a lot of podcasts, and
Okay.
so I'm on YouTube. I often do Spectator TV. Uh,
Okay.
on the basis of a column or whatever it is they're addressing that week. Uh, and with any luck, I will be all over the internet when the next book comes out because this is I really think it's the best book I've written
Mm.
in a long time. And it's such an important topic. It's impossible to run out of things to say. Um, and and there's virtually no literature out there that is even balanced. It's all rigged. It's
Hmm.
all pro-immigration, partly for narrative reasons, partly for political reasons. But I, uh, I have some high hopes. This is terribly dangerous, always dangerous to have high hopes about anything.
Hmm.
But yeah, I have some hopes. I have some hopes for this book.
Yeah.
Uh, and we'll see about trans. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to take that on. It's so
Yeah.
depressing. So,
Inspiration's mysterious, but I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in Albuquerque at the Gen Spec conference, which was
right.
ostensibly why we spoke. But thank you very much for your time and all of the wonderful work that you've done. I'm gonna put links to it down there in the description. Thank you very much, Ms.
Okay, I really
Shriver.
enjoyed talking to you, Benjamin.
As did I.
See you soon then.
Yeah, there we go. Bye.